Hey guys, welcome to People I Think Are Cool. I'm your host, Liz Reed, one part of the art duo Cuddles and Rage, and this is my podcast to interview cool, interesting, creative people. Today on the show, I have Gemma Files. I met Gemma when I was hosting a virtual panel for Fangoria, where I chatted it up with a panel of horror authors, and Gemma was amazing. I loved researching her work for that interview, and so I had to have her on the show for myself. I break down everything that she knows about horror and writing. She's been doing it a really long time. There's been some time between when I spoke to Gemma and now. It's been a crazy year, to say the least, right? I talked to Gemma about her latest book, which is In That Endlessness, Our End. It is a horror anthology, which is one of my favorite types of horror to read. I will say specifically the story Puppet Motel. It's scary by the title, but that was one of my favorite stories in the anthology. And talking to Gemma, we get some great bits on writing and writing for the horror genre. So guys, if you are a writer, this is a must listen for you or watch, because remember, if you're listening, I'm on YouTube now as well. Guys, enjoy this lovely chat with the awesome Gemma. I have your book right here.
Yay.
Yay. You have to tell me about this title, because I've seen it in articles just referenced as Endless or The Endless. So
that's hilarious.
Let's just say the full title, In That Endless, Our End. So explain.
In that endlessness.
Endlessness! End. See, I even got it wrong.
Endlessness, yeah.
All right. So, so why the long title?
Basically, it's a reference to the end of one of the stories, which is, that story is Dark, Distant Places. Yeah, so, and also in Bulb. Yeah, Distant, Dark Places and Bulb. I think in both I talk about, and then In That Endlessness will be our end.
Oh, so it comes up twice, like in two stories, that exact line?
I think it does. Definitely comes up in Bulb.
Yeah. I love that.
It's also just, for a long time, I did not know what kind of horror I was writing. And people tell me these days it's weird with a big W, and it's cosmic horror, and it's quiet horror. And, the thing that I do agree with in terms of cosmic horror is that although my stuff is not always Lovecraftian, there is often a fear of vastness. There's a fear of emptiness. There's a fear of the endless darkness of space, for example. Space freaks me out. I actually on Tumblr I have a tag that I use sometimes, which is space will fuck you up, and and it will totally fuck me up. It fucks me up all the time. One time I had to review a film which was nothing except two people explaining physics to each other, and that was one of the most horrifying films that I've ever had to sit through.
Oh, I believe it. So no space, Elon Musk like space travel for you.
Nope. No.
You're like, I'm fine.
No, yeah, seriously. My husband loves Gravity, the film. I find it really difficult to watch, particularly in a theater. He and I went to see Interstellar in IMAX at one point, and afterwards he said, "Thank you very much for that." And I said, "Yeah, no, it's okay." When we were going through the wormhole, I was just looking at the side of the screen. Reminding myself that it was there.
That's the true sacrifice. Have you heard of the overview effect?
No, I don't think so.
It's something that astronauts experience for a long time. Like when they're up in space and they look back on Earth, it's kind of like realizing that you live in this like tiny little planet. We don't see that until we have that perspective. So I feel like you would have that times 1,000 in space.
Yep, exactly. I mean, the thing that amazes me is that, it's obviously so strong that for some people, they look at photos of the Earth from space and they're like, oh, no, I don't believe in that. No, no way. You're like, yeah, that's right. We have another Earth somewhere that we're just gonna pop out at the last moment and everything will be fine. Yeah.
I don't know if I want to be dead by that point. Maybe, kind of.
Maybe.
Yeah, so when you're talking about, like, people talking about your themes, which is always kind of, like, weird when you're a writer. You're like, I don't see that in me, but I get that you see that. You know, you what do you say to that? So the one thing that I did see, and is, like, a little bit of paranoia in your characters, like, trying to, like, figure out what's going on.
Yes.
So I don't want to, I always, you know, we talked on the Fangoria chat, like, I don't like saying, like, is that right? But,
is that right?
No. I mean, but I know I sensed it there.
Are you paranoid, Gemma? Are you afraid all the time?
I think we're all paranoid. I mean, even on the smallest bit, like, I just touched my nose. Like, am I paranoid that I just touched my nose? I'm talking about it right now.
Yeah.
But when you expand that to things that you can't see, I mean, that's what makes the story so relatable.
Well, yeah. I think in hindsight that, you know, my journey with my son, who has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, brought me to the realization that, you know, essentially I was looking at a list of symptoms of Asperger's and went, wow, this sounds a lot like me when I was, like, in the worst part of my life, around when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11. And is it possible that had they been looking for Asperger's A in girls or B at all, because I was born in 1968, that I might have gotten a diagnosis as opposed to them trying to tell my mother that I might have early onset schizophrenia? Maybe, at any rate. And so in hindsight, I think that when you are neuroatypical, you spend a lot of time, and you don't have a diagnosis, because there are a lot of younger people who I know now who have diagnoses, and they see the world very differently than I've ever seen it. You spend a lot of time wondering what is wrong with you. You know, it's like, what is this disconnect that I feel between myself and the world around me? You know, it's like, why can't I figure out what people are thinking in real life? But when I watch a movie, I know exactly what people are thinking. You know, everything is really, really obvious to me. I can track, you know, emotional things going on inside the characters. I understand how the narrative was put together. I seem to remember little bits and pieces of movies that people forget instantaneously. And they're like, okay, so there was that guy and that dude, and how did that happen? And I'm like, this, that, the other thing. It's just a very different way of looking at the world, I have to assume. And so I spent a long time thinking that there was something wrong with me. And that's a very horror way to spend your life. So, you know, that supposedly paranoid thing of looking around and going, something is wrong. What is wrong? Is, I believe, the beginning of horror, always, but also the continuation of horror. You know, Clive Barker talks about dread and the pleasure of dread. And the weird thing for me is that a mounting kind of dread is familiar in a way that I almost find comforting. You know, it's like the idea that there's something wrong is not, you know, like, oh, there's something wrong. It's more like, no, let's think about this. Let's try to solve this. Let's try to, you know, figure out what it is that's wrong. You know, was it something I did? Because if it was, then I can control it. You know, I can just go, yes, that was a weird thing to say. Anyway, how are you? You know? Or whatever. So, so in a lot of ways, I see that as like my baseline. My baseline is, you know, looking around and going, yeah. So yeah, there's a definite paranoia in terms of, there's this feeling that people call the unheimlich, which is where things become, Heimlich is home-like, and unheimlich would be unhome-like. And so you look around at stuff that otherwise is very, very familiar, and it's like, is that my husband, or is that a puppet? Is that, is this my house? Is this my beautiful house? Is that my beautiful wife? Oh no, this general sort of feeling of estrangement, that things, you thought you knew how things were, but maybe you didn't. Maybe there was something that just slipped by you, and you made a lot of assumptions, thus making an ass of you, at least. And that, and again, that I think this is baseline for horror. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. When you said puppets, though, it reminded me of Puppet Motel, which I think is like the most terrifying title as someone who's afraid of dolls.
Oh my God.
So when you're writing but no dolls, when you're writing an anthology, title becomes so important because it is kind of choose your own adventure if you want. You can skip around. So how did you plan that out to make sure that every title is enticing?
That's a good question. A lot of the time I start with the title, and in that particular case, there's a song by Laurie Anderson called The Puppet Motel, which is a very creepy, slinky, odd song. A lot of Laurie Anderson's songs are more monologues done over music. And that's kind of her thing. And and the Puppet Motel came together fairly easily because I teach a course sometimes on Lit Reactor called Write What You Fear. And one of the key things that I tell people is that, you're already at a disadvantage in terms of convincing your audience, because you're saying, I'm going to tell you a story about something that you absolutely know is not true. And somehow I'm going to have to convince you that it's true. And so as the kernel of a story, usually I have something that is true. And in that particular case, I actually did find myself managing 2 Airbnbs.
Nightmare already. That's horror, period.
I know. And one of them actually was creepy as shit. And so almost everything about the Puppet Motel was true of the Puppet Motel, except, for the big things like people didn't get absorbed into the wall, and, it didn't text me. It didn't send me messages on my phone or anything like that. It was just a really creepy place. It was the kind of place where you were just like, I don't know why anybody would pay to stay here, and I don't know what they would do if they paid to stay here. And they realized that they'd have to stay here for like an entire week, because I don't like going here for 2 hours to clean it.
Oh gosh, no, I can imagine. It reminds me of this YouTube channel I watch, which is just like going into the grossest motels possible. Which the scariest thing is that they're local. I didn't realize they were local until they called out places, and they go in with like their black lights, and of course everything they say, everything has semen on it, and you're like, oh, it's not really, like that's probably vomit.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's someone who's cleaned those places. You probably know better.
It's fluids. I think it's probably fluids. I mean, the anecdote that I told about the 3 guys who just came to drink, that was true. I had to clean up after those dudes. It was just like this pyramid of beer bottles by the door. It's like, well, thank you for putting them in a pyramid by the door, but still, it was huge. It's like, how much did you drink? My God. It was like 2 guys and their dad. It's like, let's just come to Toronto for 3 days and drink.
God, no, that's terrifying.
I know.
With the horror anthology, you don't want to repeat the same themes, with every story. So how do you map that out? Because I know when we did Bites of Terror, like we kind of had a grid. and we tried to make sure
Right.
that like we hit certain themes.
Oh, my
and then
God,
it got
that's
kind of
great.
hard, like the more
Yeah.
more you went down.
You know, putting together the collection, you know, I just had a certain amount of stuff to work with. That's all that I've done since.
I'm sorry, you're going into robot voice.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it's okay.
So putting together the collection in that endlessness, I just had a certain amount of stuff to work with. And so basically it turned out to be all stuff that I had written basically shortly before Trump took office. And up until I'd say 2019. And so in a lot of ways, I think there was already a theme there. And the theme was fear. It was and unheimlichness and, you know, estrangement. But it was more hugely impending fear. It was like looking around at the world and going, no, what? I mean, I thought we were over this. I thought, what? You know, one of the things that's really being brought home to me as a person who is, you know, 52 years old, is that every 10 years there are a bunch of people coming of age who did not live through the things that you lived through. And these people need to be reconvinced of things that you take for granted. You know, things like, no, Jewish people are people. And so are Black people. And so are all people. And what is wrong with you? No, I like the whole world fought a whole war about this. You know, I wasn't there, but I was there during the Cold War, you know? and during the Rwandan genocide, and during this and during that. You know, it's like, I mean, just oh man, check yourself before you wreck yourself. It's crazy. It was sort of like the feelings that I had in real life were penetrating everything that I was writing, which was hopeful, I suppose. So a lot of the stuff in that endlessness is about how your mind can betray you and how the world can betray you and how, you can love somebody, but maybe they love something much, much more, like being a monster or trying to mash the moon into the earth because they think that human beings are awful and everything needs a reset.
I mean, that might be needed at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's pull back into writing. Oh, sorry, did you have more to say?
Yeah, no, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, okay. Let's pull back into more like writing in general.
Yes.
So when we did the Fangoria panel, like you have been in the business the longest. I mean, you've been publishing for 25 years?
Yeah,
more?
Something along those lines.
Okay. Yeah. How have you seen it change over time? Because it feels like we're going through these phases where, you know, it probably changed with the internet. And then I also feel like it's going to change again with this pandemic.
Yeah. It definitely changed with the internet. I started out as a journalist. I have a BAA in magazine journalism. And when I graduated in 1990. I didn't know that within 10 to 15 years, everything that I'd been taught, literally everything that I'd been taught, would be out of date. And, you know, so I trained in layout and I trained in, at one point I was learning broadcast journalism and we were still cutting together tape. Yeah. So, and, you know, I remember when I didn't have the internet. I didn't get the internet until I was 25. I remember when I first started writing for a weekly newspaper here in Toronto, I literally had one disc one hard disk, not one floppy disk. And I had to save my stuff on it and then walk over with it to the office so that they could put it on somebody's computer and read it into the system. So yeah, things have changed a lot in terms of technology, but also things have changed a lot in terms of the attitude towards writing. There's, somebody, Gretchen Felker Martin, was talking on Twitter recently, and she hates everything, which I love about her. But she was, she went on this huge tear about, it's like, you can't call art content, and there is this real question, I suppose, about, is it worth paying people to do things? And that's, I started out as a journalist, but I very quickly became a film critic. And, for like 10 years, I made a really good living as a film critic. For 10 years, I was actually making a better living than my husband, who works in an office. But throughout that time period, also, the idea of comments culture was starting to mount and mount and mount. And what I saw by the end of it was, it's like, I went into this because I hoped I wouldn't have to hustle all the time, because I'm not the world's best hustler. I like to, sit in a room and write my stories and send them to people, and then those people do something with them and they give me money. But by the end of it, it was sort of like, oh, okay, I see the way this is going. The way this is going is that you want to invite people to say anything about movies and not pay them at all. So, it's like, yeah, free stuff is better than stuff you have to pay for. Even if the free stuff is just, I don't know, it was okay, I guess. I could see the boom at one point. It's like, oh no,
cool,
no,
thanks.
my favorite phrase was, it was a decent enough film. And I'm like, was it morally decent? What are you talking about? It's like, was it just up to par? Is that what you're saying? It's sort of like, was it shot in such a way that you could see all the people's faces and hear their voices? What does that mean?
No, it's like you're making it sound like they didn't give themselves a voice, or they didn't even care to have a voice.
Well, that's what you get when you open it up to anybody's commentary. Sometimes you get wonderful things, and there's a guy that I know on Facebook, Brian O'Connell, who's like, oh my God, he's like maybe 18 years old, and he's an amazing film critic, and he's just posting stuff on Facebook. He'll go and educating himself at the same time. It's sort of like, I saw the bitter tears of Petra von Kant the other day, and here's what I have to say about it. I'm just like, amazing. It's too bad you'll never get paid for that, Brian, because you should be paid for that. You shouldn't be just distributing it to anybody.
No,
but,
it's true.
That was the main thing that I noticed in terms of my critical writing. And I gotta say that, the thing I've noticed in terms of my fiction writing is that, it's sort of like, okay, a lot of people are told that they can't make a living writing. And I think that is definitely true. At one point, it was possible to make a living writing because nobody was doing it, and if you could do it, people were, especially if you could just pull something out of your bum in like a certain short amount of time, people would go, oh my God, great. We've got all this space that we have to fill. So please give me your, whatever, but these days it's sort of, it's like, it's really hard for people to pay other people. It's really hard to put a venue together and keep it going. It's really hard to publish books physically and make sure that they sell through. It's really hard to, so it's wonderful that you can, and believe me, I've taken advantage of this. It's wonderful that you can get anything on a Kindle, like for $3.95 sometimes. The other day I found 40 books by Marjorie Bowen, one of my favorite older horror writers from like the turn of the century, for $2.95 on Kindle. And believe me, I snapped that up. But Marjorie's not alive anymore. She doesn't have to care. And she, and at one point she cared very deeply about the fact that she could make money writing. She was like writing for, her entire family, essentially, under 4 different pseudonyms. And if I was doing that today, I think I'd about break even.
Yeah, well, you're also competing against self-publishing, too. Yeah, which is like a totally different ball game.
Yeah, you're competing against self-publishing. You're competing against stuff that's free. You're competing against people, amazing people sometimes. I can't, again, I would never denigrate fan fiction, because fan fiction taught me how to write a book. It taught me how to make a chaptered narrative that hung together. There are some incredible people posting things for absolute free just because they love them, but yeah, there's that too, it's like, so it's really up in the air. It's an interesting time. We're all living in interesting times in the Chinese sense. So yeah, a good person to talk to about this would be Silvia Moreno Garcia. Because, she's had an amazing success with Mexican Gothic. But I remember, the 10 years that she spent building up to that, where she would, and she writes like a maniac. She has a work ethic like you wouldn't believe. And she was just like writing stuff and failing to place it, writing stuff and placing it, but then it would go out of print. It's like now, because of the success of Mexican Gothic, she has a wonderful backlist that was picked up and is being republished, I believe through Tor Nightfire, but don't quote me on that. And that's great. That's wonderful. I hope it gets all the attention because it absolutely deserves it. But yeah, there's a lot of, it's like you have to work. You got to work real hard. And yeah, and sometimes it's a bit grinding.
No, I understand. Yes, completely. And I think you have to, I love that story that you just shared about Mexican Gothic, because that is the it book.
Yeah. And it should be. It's an amazing book.
Yeah.
I love the fact that it connected, because it's gorgeous, beautifully written. I think this was the right moment for it as well.
So much of it is like luck and like hard work, like you're saying. But yeah. I also think something that is such a struggle is also like not looking at your fellow peer, other writers, and saying like, okay, you're taking off. I've been doing this for 10 years. Why am I not getting the mansion?
Yeah, there's like no point to that action.
No.
I remember, God, when I was like 25, somebody, I had written a lot of stuff. To be frank, none of it is stuff that I would show to anybody now, but I was showing it to a colleague, a friend of mine, someone who had been published. And I said, how long did it take you to get published? How long did it take you to get your books published? And she's like, how old are you? I said, 25. She said, yeah, I'm 45. And yeah, you're halfway there.
You have to love to do it, period. Yes, like, you're not going to be making that quick cash like you would as like an influencer, or, we have that culture of it's a quick grab. Yeah. And that's not the case with publishing at all, or most things. No, it's not. And it's not the case with, writing really is a vocation. It's a drive. I always knew that I would be writing. And, when I was younger, I tried to find
ways to monetize that. Journalism, believe it or not, was an idea to monetize, the fact that I would be writing no matter what. I'd always be writing about something. So, yeah. How was I to know? I don't know. It's like the struggle that people are going through right now, people in the journalism field, the struggle that people are going through with this whole concept of fake news, that like everything's an opinion piece. It's like, God, I can't tell you any different, but the idea that everything is an opinion piece is your opinion. The fact is, some things are facts, some things are true. You actually have to check your facts before someone will publish something.
Yeah, this goes back to maybe it's you, maybe not me, you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like there are people who I used to think had a lifetime stable job, one that I aspired to, in the time that it's taken me to become known as a fiction writer, primarily. There are still people in Toronto who know me mainly as a film critic, which is pretty funny. It's like, oh yeah, I remember I used to read your reviews in the Eye. It's like, yep. Yes, Eye is gone, but I'm still here. Anyway, it amazes me the way that things have turned around. It's really nice that people will give me props now for making up stories. That's pleasant. Because guess what? It's not easier than writing about stuff that's real.
No, yeah, absolutely. You kind of almost like second guess yourself. You can't second guess the facts. They're just there.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Last question for you. My favorite thing in our Fangoria chat was just, your knowledge on movies, and then to know that you were past life film critic. Yeah. So when I see you talking about Oliver Reed on Twitter, I'm like, oh, you tugged at me. I have a biography of him sitting by my bedside. I'm like, I want to find out about his crazy. So when you're, consuming media, and, I think we all consume media or content for inspiration.
Yep.
I always feel guilty that sometimes I pull more from movies than reading books, even though I'm a writer. How do you balance that, or do you even care?
I always, I'll always have like a moment during the year where I'm like, oh man, I'm just not reading anything. And then, at the end of last year, I published, I posted on Facebook the books that I had really enjoyed during that year. And people were like, there's like 50 of these. What the hell is wrong with you? So yeah, it's like I read pretty fast. I've always read pretty fast. And one of the things that I do for fun is I go back and I read really old stuff. At the moment, I'm going through a series called Women's Weird. Yeah, there's a Women's Weird 1 and Women's Weird 2. And so it's stuff from like the turn of the century to the 30s, written by women. And they are weird stories, and some of them are horror and some of them are ghost stories, but some of them are just strange. Some of them are just very odd, and they're quite fascinating. I got a collection by the writer with the unfortunate name of Mary Butts. I'm not even kidding you. Yeah, that's her name. And mainly because she wrote one of the best ghost stories that I've ever read, which is a story called With and Without Buttons. It's about two sisters who try to make up a ghost to scare this very bluff, mansplainy dude who lives next door to them, and just annoys the two of them. And they're like, we're just gonna catch him off guard, and we're gonna make up a ghost. And it doesn't quite go the way they want. Yeah, something about gloves, I think. I found a box of gloves in the attic. Yes, gloves, all single, with and without buttons. So we'll start with that. And yeah, it doesn't quite go the way that they want. So because I love that story so much, I got an entire collection by Mary Butts. And again, they're not all horror stories. In fact, most of them are not horror stories, but they all have this really interesting tone to them. So yeah, that's one of the things that I do, and I do that all the time. I'm mainly an autodidact, a person who I wouldn't say completely self-educated, but when I'm interested in something, I'll just go for it and explore it as far as I can. So yeah, that's the thing that I'm doing right now in terms of research reading. But yeah, I'm a big movie person, huge movie person, and I always have been a big, huge movie person. The thing I was thinking about doing is trying to move away from watching horror so much, because horror is my comfort food, like I said. So over last year, watched a lot of horror.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Nothing but horror. And that was great in some ways, because I discovered a lot of things that I hadn't seen before. And, that's the world we live in, right? It's like you can get anything. And it's all streaming somewhere. There's always a new thing. But after a while, you're sort of like, okay, now I really have to sit down and watch Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Not just because I
saw your Twitter.
Exactly. And there's so much to be gotten out of that. There's so much to be gotten out of, asking yourself, what are the things that you like that are not comfortable for you? And why do you like those things? There are movies I remember from back when I was reviewing, which I've never seen since the time that I reviewed them. And sometimes I would like to go back and see whether or not my taste has changed. I thought Citizen Kane was a bad movie until I was like in my 30s. Well, not bad, but it suffers from what I used to call Godfather syndrome, which is...
Yeah, it was hyped. So hyped.
Oh, okay. But better yet, it started a whole bunch of different things that everybody started incorporating into their narratives. And so I remember I showed Godfather in class once, and a guy at the back was like, "That's not all that, man. What's better than that? Empire with John Leguizamo." I'm like, Empire is a ripoff of Godfather, and I'm sorry to say that, because you obviously like it quite a bit. But the fact is that, it's like, what do you think came first? Do you think it was the movie from the 70s or the movie that was made 2 years ago?
I feel like don't get you started on Tarantino, because once you start watching a lot of old films, you're like, hey, and sometimes you're like, hey, that's the exact same dialogue.
No, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But I don't know. I was a huge Tarantino fan at one point. And
I was. He was my high school crush.
I had an argument with Roger Ebert about whether or not From Dusk Till Dawn was a good movie.
Oh, wow. How'd that go?
He was not persuaded, but he was very nice about it.
But, the gun scene, like the little, creative, use of guns and where their placement is. That was new.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think that was mainly Tom Savini.
I could see that. See that.
Oh, I got a great idea.
Yeah, really, just go with it.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
the best.
Yeah, I didn't think that I would live long enough for Tarantino to become a kind of punchline among Zillennials for his love of feet, for example.
Well, once upon a time in Hollywood, right when I see those feet go up on the dashboard, I'm like, was she comfortable? Actually, there's an article about her being kind of uncomfortable about that, which I found interesting.
Yes. Not everybody likes feet.
No, not everybody thinks their feet are pretty. Feet.
even
No.
their own feet.
I was just feeling the back of my own feet the other day. I was like, you guys need a good scrub.
Yeah, exactly.
A little rough.
Like, I totally, I'm not kink shaming here, but, but yeah, I totally understand that. At any rate, I think with most people who are talented, there are things that you're going to like and there are things that you're not going to like. I remember Gangs of New York is a huge movie for me. I actually went to see that, like over 20 times in the theater. Because I just really, really enjoyed inhabiting that film. And I remember somebody reviewed it and said, yeah, it's like so Liam Neeson playing the usual Scorsese twofer, a gangster priest. I was like, yeah, if you're going to reduce somebody's entire oeuvre to a one-liner, then yes, you're not wrong, but...
Yeah. Oh, poor guy. And now he's known as like the kidnapper revenge guy. Although I hear he's getting away from that, but
Thankfully, yeah. There's only so long you can do that. There's only so long you can do that as an actor.
No, totally.
But he's done a lot longer than I ever thought he could.
Well, because he's a good actor, so why not?
Absolutely. And, this the same way that Scorsese is now known as the, I hate the Avengers guy, which I don't think is true. He loves movies generally, but he has, he has opinions. And
I think it has more to do with like the stealing attention away from other films and dominating.
That's exactly what it is. And that's one of the things that I've always loved about Scorsese, that he will champion other people's work and that he just wants to see everything. It's like, yeah, there's a guy who made a film in Africa that I absolutely want to see,
But he appreciates how hard it is.
Absolutely.
It's not easy.
No, it's not easy at all. And and his championship of film restoration, which to my mind is never a bad thing.
No, absolutely not. Like we're huge Criterion fans and Indicator Arrow, all those guys. They're doing the Lord's work.
They are. It's true. Sometimes I'll be watching something and Steve will just be like, my husband will just be like, I'm not sure that needed to be as beautifully clear as it was, because what it boils down to is a person with, gigantic sores on their face puking on somebody or whatever. And I'm just like, yeah, but it's beautiful in its own way. And he's like, agree to disagree.
Go back to your space, okay?
Yeah, go back to space.
Well, Gemma, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation and congrats on the new book.
Oh, thank you very much.
I love it. I love having a conversation about it.
I'm really, really happy with the way that it's being received. And yes, it's made an old lady very happy.
You deserve happiness.
I agree.
Well, I can't wait to see what's next from you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Gemma for being on the show. I talked to her before recording this intro, and she has a few new books coming out in the pipeline. So go follow Gemma on Twitter. I will have all of her information in the show notes. And as tradition, the movie that I am recommending for Gemma, it's not horror. I'm in kind of a feel-good mood. I know I should be horror. Although I have got in trouble for how I pronounce that word, and it makes me very self-conscious. But I will recommend a movie that I watched last night, which is called Stray. And it basically follows the stray dogs in Turkey. I love that movie. It was just a very quiet film, and it's a documentary. So it's not like live action, dogs talking or anything like that. And as somebody who adopts her pets, it was a fascinating watch. So I think that we were streaming it. I can't remember which service, but I'll have the link in the show notes. But if you just go to Just Watch and you type in Stray, whenever you're listening to this interview or watching it, then you'll be able to see where you can stream that movie. Until next time, guys. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to come up with my motto. Until next time, guys, keep creating. That sounds weird. Until next time, stay cool and keep creating. Keep making cool stuff. Stay cool and keep creating.